how did he become the person who allowed himself to do this terrible act?
It is now up to a federal jury to decide the appropriate punishment.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we'll be looking at the most notorious siblings who committed heinous crimes together.
With their dark, brooding looks and violent temperaments, twins Ronald and Reginald Cray became notorious early in life.
Wayne and Paul Hardy. In the late 1980s, brothers Wayne and Paul Hardy founded a drug trafficking ring known as the Hardy Boys, operating between Los Angeles and their hometown, New Orleans. They terrorized their city, silencing rivals and bribing police officers to protect their operations.
For protection, the drug lords turned to those whose duty was to serve and protect. The cops. Officers lined their pockets while enforcing the will of the dealers.
One such officer was Len Davis, a corrupt cop known for his imposing build and ruthless tactics. In 1994, after a woman named Kim Groves filed a complaint against Davis for physically assaulting her nephew, he enlisted Paul Hardy to kill her. The murder sparked outrage in the city and exposed widespread corruption within the police force.
With the help of two accomplices, Hardy acted quickly, coldly, and for just $300.
Both Paul and Davis were sentenced to death, although Paul's sentence was later commuted to life. Meanwhile, Wayne was killed in a shooting in January 1996. The Frier Brothers. What was meant to be a night of laughter and campfire songs quickly turned into a nightmare for five friends on November 17, 1973.
5 teenagers ventured into the park for a night around a campfire. Most of them wouldn't return home.
The group, which consisted of 5 boys and 1 girl, Sandra Chesky, was ambushed at Gitche-Manitou State Preserve in Iowa by Alan, James, and David Frier. The Frier brothers posed as narcotics agents searching for illegal drugs, but instead murdered the 4 boys and abducted Chesky to their farmhouse, where she was sexually assaulted before being released. Chesky immediately reported the crime and led police to the farmhouse, where they arrested Alan, and eventually James and David.
The mass murder left loved ones in disbelief.
In Sioux Falls in 1973, stuff like that didn't happen. You know, we didn't lock our doors.
Her testimony at trial was crucial in securing life sentences without the possibility of parole for all 3 brothers. Tamerlan and Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. The Tsarnaev brothers arrived in the U.S. as children brought by their Chechen father, who sought asylum to escape political persecution.
As with so many around the world, for the Tsarnaevs, the dream of America had proven irresistible.
It was here that the Tsarnaevs landed in the early 2000s, Norfolk Street in Cambridge, Massachusetts. In fact, that's their place there.
Over time, they became influenced by extremist ideologies and orchestrated an attack in protest of U.S. foreign policies. On April 15, 2013, the brothers left 2 homemade explosives near the Boston Marathon finish line, killing 3 people and injuring nearly 300. They were eventually identified through surveillance footage. This led to a massive manhunt that ended with Tamerlan being injured in a police shootout and ultimately dying at the hospital. While Dzhokhar managed to escape, he was later found hiding in a resident's backyard. He was tried on 30 criminal accounts, convicted, and sentenced to death.
The federal government sought this death penalty primarily for 2 reasons: the heinous nature of the crime and the fact that there was so much premeditation. Law enforcement officials said that they wanted to show the public that they took this case seriously and that the most severe punishment was warranted in this case.
Micajah and Wiley Harp. Often regarded as the first known serial killers in U.S. history, Micajah, Big Harp, and Wiley, Little Harp wreaked havoc on the frontier in the late 18th century.
Stories we heard make your blood run cold. I hear tell they moved through the wilderness like the natives themselves. Silent. 2 lurking devils, just waiting to spring on any unsuspected passersby.
Born in North Carolina, the Harp brothers drifted into crime during the American Revolution, siding with British loyalist militias. After the war, they continued a violent spree across Tennessee, Kentucky, Illinois, and Mississippi, indiscriminately killing men, women, and even children, often without any motive beyond sadistic pleasure. As their spree continued, vigilante groups began to form to seek justice.
Defeat me and I'll submit myself to the courts and the noose without further protest. That's what you want, isn't it?
In 1799, one group finally tracked them down and managed to kill Big Harp. Little Harp successfully escaped and began going by an alias, but he was ultimately captured in 1804 and executed. Pete and Pat Bandant. The Bandant twins were infamous in their Elkton, Tennessee hometown for dealing practically every drug.
They were known to be able to get whatever you wanted for the people who were doing drugs. Drug dealers become popular, and they became popular based on that.
However, it wasn't their trafficking that landed them behind bars. Pete and Pat Bandant lived together in a farmhouse that became notorious for its parties, attracting many locals. But 3 individuals who visited never left alive. Gwen Duggar vanished after spending the night in May 1986, followed by Ronnie Gaines in October.
Some of the community in Elkton, which had heard things, but were reluctant to disclose what they heard because they were scared of the Bandurans.
During the investigation, police intended to question Pat's girlfriend, Terry Lynn Clark, but she also turned up dead. Eventually, Pat's estranged wife, Denise, revealed that the brothers had murdered all 3 victims and disposed of their remains. This led to their conviction, with Pat sentenced to life and Pete serving 25 years before being released in 2016. Reginald and Jonathan Carr. Over a 1-week span in December 2000, Reginald and Jonathan Carr unleashed a horrific crime spree in Wichita, Kansas, claiming 5 lives and leaving 2 people severely injured.
The brothers were sentenced to death after being convicted of dozens of crimes, including the capital murder of 4 people in a brutal attack in which another woman survived. They were also convicted of attacking another woman who later died and of carjacking a local coach.
This event became known as the Wichita Massacre. It began on December 8th when they robbed and shot 2 people 3 days apart, one of whom later died from her wounds. Then on December 14th, they broke into a home where they found 5 individuals. After sexually assaulting the women, the brothers forced all 5 to engage in sexual acts with each other. They then emptied their bank accounts before shooting the victims and leaving them for dead. Miraculously, 1 woman survived and reported to the police. The brothers were arrested and ultimately sentenced to death.
The U.S. Supreme Court is refusing to hear any more appeals from Jonathan and Reginald Carr, which means their death sentence is considered final.
The Gonzalez Sisters. Known as Las Poquianchis, the Gonzalez Sisters were 4 women from Jalisco, Mexico, who ran a network of brothels across the country in the 1950s and 60s. The eldest, Delfina, and the youngest, Maria de Jesus, led the operation. They often recruited girls from low-income areas with promises of jobs as maids or waitresses. Once trapped, the girls were forced into sex work, and when they became too ill or deemed unfit to continue, they were killed. The horror came to light when police arrested one of their recruiters, who then ratted them out. When their property was searched, police discovered the remains of 91 people buried on site. The sisters were tried in 1964 and each sentenced to 40 years in prison. Alberto and Vito Aguechi. The Aguechi brothers, Alberto and Vito, were key figures in a drug smuggling ring that operated between the US and Canada in the late 1950s and early 60s. The ring was closely linked to the New York Mafia, particularly the Buffalo crime family. Using Sicilian immigrants as couriers, the brothers transported drugs in suitcases and paid tributes to Buffalo boss Stefano Magaddino. However, their operation began to unravel in 1960 after 2 smugglers were arrested and turned informants. By 1961, the Aguechis were indicted and Alberto was detained. Frustrated by Magaddino's refusal to cover his bail, Alberto threatened to expose him. Shortly after, he was found dead, likely on the boss's orders. Meanwhile, Vito was arrested and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Ronnie and Reggie Cray. In the 1950s and 60s, identical twin brothers Ronnie and Reggie Cray were fixtures of the swinging London scene as they owned a famous nightclub and mingled with celebrities.
The twins did indeed commandeer whatever they wanted, whether it was money, material items, or manpower.
But behind that glamorous front, they led a ruthless gang called the Firm, engaging in crimes like armed robbery, arson, and murder. By the late 60s, the Kray Twins had become even more brazen in their criminal activities.
It was a messy, really messy job, what they did of him anyway. It took a long time to kill him, apparently. It was a bad scene.
In 1966, Ronnie murdered rival George Cornell in a packed pub, and the following year, Reggie did the same to Jack the Hat McVitie over a failed hit job. Following these high-profile killings, authorities built a solid case against the Krays and arrested them in May 1968. They were both tried and sentenced to life imprisonment.
The Krays did their sorry best to live their lives in prison, whilst clinging to a name and reputation that was being diluted by each and every embarrassing charade that was being carried out by their minions.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications.
Lyle and Eric Menendez. The affluent community of Beverly Hills, California was rocked by a double murder on August 20th, 1989.
No signs of a break-in or a burglary, only the bodies of entertainment executive Jose Menendez and his wife Kitty in the family TV room, torn by shotgun blast that one of the neighbor kids heard.
The victims, Jose and Kitty Menendez, left behind two sons, Lyle and Eric, who initially claimed they were not home during the killings. However, police became suspicious after the boys began lavishly spending their inheritance. Eventually, the brothers confessed, claiming that years of sexual, emotional, and physical assault drove them to murder. But the prosecution argued they acted out of anger after being disinherited from their father's will. Their 1993 trials ended in deadlocks, but a retrial in 1996 convicted both of first-degree murder, sentencing them to life without parole. In October 2024, renewed public interest prompted the LA District Attorney to recommend resentencing for both brothers.
Do you think the Menendez brothers will walk free someday?
Given the totality of the circumstances, I don't think that they deserve to be in prison until they die, okay? I don't believe that.
Did we miss any other criminal relatives? File a report against them in the comments below.
Anybody attempted to bother the other brother?
Of course, everyone will tell you, if you fought one bondurant, you fought them both.